Hi, and welcome to the third in this series of videos around integrated strategy execution. In the last video, we understood the secrets behind some of the world's best executing companies. What we're going to focus on in this video is how do organizations progress towards effective and world-class strategy execution. We're going to zone in on something we call the strategy execution maturity model. This is a model that's been developed in conjunction with a consortium group of global 5,000 companies that explore basically best practices around how companies execute. And we've used that group and a wider group of organizations who've participated in a survey, the details of the URL at the bottom of the screen here, where we've effectively understood the journey over the last 10 years that organizations take to move from what I described in the very first video of the integrated series, which was around basically the, if you like, the traditional budgeting driven approach all the way through to what we consider to be world-class integrated strategy execution. The model of the strategy execution maturity model is basically something that has 4 stages in it. So the maturity model starts with the stage effectively of traditional. So this stage basically describes the example that we talked about in the first video, which is a business which has fundamentally a planning process that's driven, a strategic planning process that's driven effectively by the executives going off site, thinking hard about what they're going to do, then coming back and trying to break that down, that plan that they developed effectively into a series of PowerPoint plans that they're going to do, and then they start a little bit later in the year coming up with the budget. And of course, by the time the year's over, we've watched the first video. This whole process leads ultimately to an organization that's driven really largely by the budget that gets developed by the finance community to run the organization. Now, at this level, what we call the traditional, there's a disconnect between the strategic objectives and actually what the allocation of resources and what's getting done in the day-to-day. And when you combine that with the whirlwind, the challenges people have of operating the balance between the day-to-day activities, the stuff we need to do to get stuff out the door, versus the strategically important stuff, the reality is that we see organizations broadly achieving, unfortunately, no more typically than 25% of the goals that they set themselves. And that's the data from nearly 250 responses from global 5,000 companies, where people self-assessed both at the level they were at according to the assessment model and the level of achievement they were seeing in terms of the strategic objectives. But the good news is that we can move forward from here. There are 3 other stages that we've identified in this journey towards world-class execution. The first stage is disciplined. The discipline stage is when an organization basically starts to bring a level of discipline to the way that they plan and manage the execution of programs and projects, and the way they drive continuous improvement, or measure and drive continuous improvement. So what we see in traditional organizations is that there are project disciplines, but these are largely contained within the project-driven functions like R&D or IT or those kind of activities. But when you move towards discipline, when we add this additional execution discipline, this discipline sees the growth of project management outside the traditional project functions to the support functions, HR, finance and other functions, as well as other business functions, where they start to bring a degree of project management disciplines into those organizations. What we also see at the discipline stage is organizations that are starting to adopt or effectively to a large extent have made the default how they drive improvement, how they measure performance, things like Lean Six Sigma, business process management, disciplines around how they define, measure and improve processes. And what you also see at this stage is the birth of effectively a more systematic approach to measurement. We see, for example, the use of balanced scorecards at the aggregate level, typically with mostly lagging measures. but also some operational measurement, and where a lot of times in the sort of run the business activity, a level of operational scorecards and daily management in, predominantly from those organizations that have got a lean background. So that this execution discipline helps an organization move from traditional to disciplined level. At the next stage, we see organizations beginning to bring a degree of focus to their and making a sort of harder choices. So what you see is typically in response to some fairly significant execution imperative, either the organization needs to transform because of environmental challenges or competitive stress or some other things which are causing it to need to focus on executing strategy, or where the organization fundamentally needs to, for example, address, we have a new CEO or some other internal driver where there's somebody who wants to demonstrate a massive amount of improvement in performance in one period, and then what happens is that the organization needs to better coordinate and effectively centrally orchestrate, if you like, the activities that need to be done to fulfill that strategy. And when that happens, when what we call that stage of evolution is effectively the aligned level. And that level, if you like, of aligned, what you see at that stage is basically the introduction of basically two organizational responses. Either an organization building on its lean foundation really takes the concept of typically Hoshian planning and uses that idea as a way of connecting the strategic goals through its annual strategy process to the execution of the projects and programs that it's delivering. So when you see here in this response, really what we're doing is we're making a more robust translation for strategy, cascading and deployment, and a linking to the actual execution to create that alignment. So this is all about alignment, as I said, and hard choices. Being able to make better priority decisions because we're creating a framework where we can actually test to say, is this stuff actually going to deliver the outcomes we expect? The other response that we see at this stage is when an organization has come very much from the project management discipline, and we see whilst there's a growth of a number of different PMOs at the disciplined level, what we see at the aligned level is the introduction typically of an enterprise program office or transformation office or some other group level group that's responsible for the coordination and in many cases execution or direction of major cross-business, cross-functional programs that are delivering the strategic goals of the organization. And that ultimately is an incredibly important shift because we are really aligning more of the people and the organization with the goals, but it's not the full picture. What happens in some of the most sophisticated execution organizations that, like the ones I shared with you about in the last video, they operate really at what we call the integrated level. And the distinction here is where, of course, at the aligned level, we have a degree of ensuring that the things that we're doing stack up with the objectives. What the integrated level is really about closing the loop. It's about being able to not just understand, are we on track? And if we're not on track, what are we doing about it in terms of executing our strategy? But ultimately, are we doing enough? It's the ability to get feedback from actual execution so we can actually re-inform ourselves at two levels. At the level of being able to say, in terms of the goals that we're tracking and the initiatives we're implementing, are we actually moving the dials we expect? And if not, what's the gap and what are we doing about it? So it's really about course correcting as quickly as possible. I mean, organizations, as I've said many times, are like super tankers. You don't want to wait until you're just before the rocks to be able to turn the wheel. And to be able to move, you have to learn as early as possible that the assumptions that underpin your strategy aren't the ones that are actually playing out in reality, and therefore you need to change the game. So at two levels, I need to first understand if my execution isn't as I expect it and course correct that, but I also need to be able to test whether my assumptions are playing out. So at the end of the day, the integrated system is one that allows you on a monthly basis to establish whether you need to course correct, and on a quarterly or annual basis to be able to make sure that your assumptions as they're playing out, if there's something wrong with your fundamental strategy, that you can actually change direction or recalibrate what you're trying to achieve, so you actually do get to what you want in the end. So all of that focus on basically closing the loop, this concept basically steps out then the 4 stages of the maturity model. And just a couple of other points to share with you. We have done a survey of organizations that have basically helped them understand some of the steps they can take at different stages to move through this. And again, if you feel like you'd like to understand how your organization stacks up against that large group, feel free to take the survey, and as part of our feed out to the network and our sort of help to people trying to move forward, we'll more than happily give you a summary of where your organization stacks up against the other organizations that have taken the survey on a confidential basis. But what that survey has fundamentally told us is that organizations that are at the integrated level basically are achieving not 25% of their goals, but on average 75% of their goals. And what that basically is saying to us is that there is a huge premium, because this is clearly correlated, there's a lot of research that's clearly correlated with improved results, improved economic results. And if we can be able to move in this direction, that's the Holy Grail. So one other piece of information as far as the distribution of organizations from the ones that completed the survey, it's quite interesting that basically of all the organizations that completed the survey before the beginning of 2015, when we took this data, there were effectively essentially this many organizations in each of those segments, or these stages of maturity, which basically says the vast majority of organizations today are at this level of building discipline. So the opportunity available for organizations to build on this and to move forward is huge. And we can all understand and learn from the likes of Danaher and other organizations that have achieved this. But clearly, there's an enormous amount of systematic approach and integration required to achieve this. And we can tell you more about how to get from where you are to where you want to be in the next videos, where we're going to focus on some of the structural interventions you can make to help move up this maturity model. Thank you very much.